I'm sorry. Oh. Okay. Anyone else have anything?
We just remembered that we were supposed to record this. So just remember, we're not Mo. We don't get it all right.
It's okay. It's all good. So how about Daniel? Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Would you like to do our little Bible ditty?
Okay. Yes. Yes, I would. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let's start. Everybody can unmute your microphones, and we'll all say it together. That this is my Bible.
This is my Bible.
This is my Bible.
I will read it.
I'll read it.
I will read it.
I will live it.
I will live it.
I will share it.
I will share it.
By the grace of God.
By the grace of God.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. So here we are, Escola Sabbatina and Genesis, in the book of Genesis. So we are continuing in the book of Genesis, and I believe Teresa has the outline for the upcoming week of chapter 4 and
Yes.
continuing.
Yes, that'll be our closing song. We'll wait for that, Kim. But anyway, we're on chapter 4, lesson 3, chapter 4. Don't get as confused as I am this week. But anyway, we're going to be talking about Cain and Abel. So that was another great story. It seems like things are just going downhill pretty fast in Genesis, right? I mean, the first 2 chapters were just so glorious. We're hearing about creation and everything, but now we get into Genesis 4. Can someone read the first? We're going to stay mostly in Genesis today. I think, in fact, we're going to stay exactly in Genesis 4. So if you just find Genesis 4, that's the chapter we're going to read, and we'll just ask a few questions about, just to get you starting to think about them. There's going to be a lot more in your lesson to try to cipher out, but just to get you started to thinking about Cain and Abel, the story of Cain and Abel. Can someone read for us the first 2 verses of chapter 4?
I'll do that for you. I have it in what we call the New International Version. And it says, Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain was a worker of the soil.
Mm-hmm. And it brought out in our lesson that in some translations, it almost sounds as if Eve, when it says, I have acquired a man from the Lord, she's really saying she thought he was the Lord. She thought he was that seed, that deliverer, the one that was going to deliver them. So they really had high hopes for Cain, didn't they? What do you think their occupations of these 2 brothers? What do they tell you about them? One was a shepherd, and the other one was a gardener. Was there anything unusual about those occupations, do you think? They were probably pretty neat. Yeah.
People of the land of the earth, they just like the father was a gardener, that he was in charge of the garden at first, and so then they were in charge of growing things, also growing the grains, whether it's wheat or barley or whatever they started growing by that time, and then they were in charge of the herds, of the herds that they had, because they had domestic animals in the garden even, and so they're in charge of the herds there, or one of them. Abel was.
Well, if you think about the two things that people need, after a disaster or anything, you need food and clothing, right? So here we've got a gardener and a shepherd. He's going to be in charge of getting them the wool and the things to make their clothing with. So very important occupations, both of them. Well, do you think that since they had such high hopes in Cain, because he was the firstborn, do you think they treated these two brothers differently? Not much is mentioned about Abel. He doesn't even say anything in the whole chapter. We don't hear any words from him. But we never really treat our children the same, do we? Because they're all different. The trick is we have to treat them fairly, though. That's about all we can do. We have to recognize their differences, but we still treat them fairly. And I'm not sure if they did that in their family back then or not. But it's something to think about for our families, isn't it?
It is. Like you say, we don't have any real way of knowing, but it would have been hard, I think, not to favor Cain when you had that high of hopes for him in your heart, be like, this one's going to be, save us all and be God. And, this one's just a guy.
Yeah. It would have been hard. Well, let's read the next few verses here, 3 to 5, and think about what the offerings that they gave and what they might have meant. So let's read chapter 4, 3 to 5. Somebody else want to read that?
Can I, Teresa?
Yes, go ahead, Dilma.
In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Wow.
So when you study this this week, be sure and be thinking, okay, why wasn't Cain's offering accepted and Abel's was? I mean, that's the big question. But here's one time I guess I am going to go to another verse here. Can somebody, let's see, Claudio's coming back. Can you admit him? Good. Okay, I'm going to read Hebrews 11:4 for us, because it talks about Abel too. In the faith chapter, it says, by faith, Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it, he being dead still speaks. So it's mostly, it was Abel's righteousness, that he was righteous, it said. God testified to that. It wasn't so much what he gave, but it must have had to do with his spirit and his character. There was something in something that Cain was harboring that, was made it so that his offering wasn't accepted. I don't know about you, but I've always kind of had the impression, I don't know if it's because I've heard of a sermon, that Cain offered the fruits of his garden, and instead of, but in a way, that's what Abel did too. So I don't think it was necessarily righteousness by faith and righteousness by works, although you can get something out of that too. But it wasn't so much what the sacrifices were, because they had thank offerings that consisted of garden produce like that. I mean, we read about that in Leviticus, don't we? So it wasn't what was the offering itself. It was the character of the person. That's the reason why one got accepted and one did not. Do you guys agree with that? Anybody have any other? Yeah.
Yes. That Abel offered from his first fruit, from his first flock
Yeah.
that were firstborn. And that it doesn't say that about Cain, that he offered, and that God says that we're to bring our first fruits of the grain, everything, to the temple, to him, and give it
Yeah.
to him. And so I think it's like you were saying, the attitude of the heart of how a person is, if the person is really thankful, or if they're just doing it because they need to do it
Yeah.
on it. Okay, so go ahead. Anybody else?
That's,
Yes.
anybody else have thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that with regard to Cain. I believe he brought his idea of what should be done. He didn't necessarily follow what God's um, protocol was. And so I think because he offered it out of that that spirit of rebellion, that spirit of, independence. I'll do it my way. Don't you tell me how to do it. I'm gonna give what I want to give, and that's the way it's gonna happen. And I think, like you were saying, Daniel and Teresa, that the spirit of his heart was not right with the Lord, and he offered from uh, his own resources. He didn't. How do I put it? He wasn't complying with the way God would have him do it, whereas Abel went ahead and offered the sacrifice that God required. Cain offered what he wanted to do, and
At the
he was
time, he
trying.
required it too, maybe.
Right, he was trying to do it his way and not God's way. And I think that's where we all run into trouble, is when we try to do life our own way and not God's way.
And we know right away by, yeah, go ahead, Kim.
I was just gonna notice that if we go to the memory verse, it talks about if you don't do what's right, sin is crouching at the door. And I'm thinking about the fact that, when you boil it all down, sin is basically simply not trusting in God for your salvation. And all the other bad stuff that, goes with that simply follows that basic boiled down principle. And if Cain went with the wrong attitude, then everything else that God is saying afterwards makes sense. Why are you angry? If you do what's right, you'll be accepted. So I don't think it was just that sacrifice alone that was, it doesn't, it says, it doesn't just say God looked at one sacrifice and liked it, and the other he didn't. He said he looked at the men and he accepted and didn't accept. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. I'm not sure I didn't just say what everybody else said in a slightly different way.
Well, we know that Cain got angry pretty fast. In that verse 5, it said, and Cain was very angry and his countenance fell. So that tells us something about where his mind and his spirit was. And it doesn't say he was angry with his brother. He was angry. Do you think he was angry at God as well? Because his sacrifice hadn't been accepted? Sounds like it could have been.
Those firstborns, they're always they've
Oh, wait a minute. I'm a firstborn.
they've got that perfectionistic spirit, and they try so hard to do everything so perfectly.
Yeah.
And so right. And that's what I've noticed about firstborns. And so and it's not any kind of an insult or a condemnation upon firstborns. It's just it's the fact of their birth order. And there's a whole book on the birth order book by Dr. Kevin Lehman, if you want to get some insight into where people are in the birth order and how it impacts their personality and influences them. So I think he was accustomed to being, looked at by his parents as doing the right thing. And so this time he's trying to do the right thing and it's not the right thing. And so that just enraged him, which that's when you can tell the spirit of the Lord was not there. Now that's looking as though the spirit of the serpent had come in at that point.
I got to thinking this week because I studied it this week, but you guys are going to be studying it this week. The idea of the favorite, they kind of thought that Cain was kind of a favorite in the family because they thought he was the seed. They were really expecting a lot out of him. The parents were, and maybe that's why he, went bad. But look at the story of Joseph. Now, Joseph was not the firstborn, but he was favored by Jacob, wasn't he? And his brothers got angry with him too. So, the story all fits in. I mean, even Jesus, right? He was came with his own to his own, and his own received him not. So he was. All of these are just kind of a prefigure of Jesus. We're getting closer and closer to learning more in this story of how it all just fits in and helps build our knowledge about the plan of salvation, doesn't it?
Well, Teresa,
Yeah.
We know with Joseph, he was the firstborn to his mother.
Well, yeah, the favored mother, the favored wife.
Yes. So he was a firstborn in his own right, and so that kind of brought him into a different standing, I believe, with the Lord. And
what about Jacob and Esau? There's another. You look at two brothers. Technically, Esau was the oldest.
Yeah, but Jacob have I loved and Esau have I hated. Because why? Because I think that Esau despised his birthright over his stomach. So that was kind of a very small
character counts.
Yes,
character counts.
A small reward for a great price. He gave up his birthright for a little cup of stew.
Well, Cain ended up losing a lot too, didn't he? Let's read verse 9, and this is after he had killed Abel, and the Lord came to him again. Somebody want to read verse 9, chapter 4, verse 9?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Okay.
From the NIV, an older version of the NIV. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?"
Boy, that seems like kind of a flippant answer, doesn't it? to God. But I ask myself the question, are we our brother's keeper? Look into that a little bit this week as you study. In what way are we our brother's keeper?
Well, I think it says that, pure religion is this, that you care for the orphan and the widow.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, we are our brother and sister's keeper.
Mm-hmm. When we don't do that, could it lead to their death? Do you think if we're not, in a sense, it is pretty important, isn't it, to be our brother's keeper? Well, verses 11 to 16 talks about Cain's punishment. And well, let's just go ahead and read I know it's a lot of verses, but let's read verses 11 to 18. It's 7 verses there. But I want us to be thinking about what the purpose of Cain's punishment was when we're done. What would it accomplish? So somebody want to read 11 to 18 for us?
Dilma? You're a
Yes,
beautiful
we
reader.
are.
Yes,
Yes,
please.
thank you. I'll be reading from the NIV.
Okay.
Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. But the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden.
Excellent.
That's
Thank you.
okay. That's okay. We can stop there. Yeah, through 16. So that verse 16 there said that he went away from the presence of the Lord.
Oh yes, so Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden.
Mhm. The story, if you look at the story of Jonah, it uses almost the same words there, that when he ran away from God, he was trying to run away from the presence of God. Can we do that?
I think that is one of the first responses. You know, when we have done wrong, we try to hide or we try to run away from God.
Mhm.
And whatever that looks like, it may manifest differently in everybody who tries that tactic. But I think that is, you know, among the things that we do when we're trying to hide our sin, hide our shame, all of these things we try to deny.
Evidently God doesn't just immediately withdraw himself from us, though, because he still was there with Jonah. He still was out calling to him. Adam and Eve, he was still, even though they were separated from God after they sinned, he was still out looking for them. I think we eventually will get to the place where we don't see God anymore. And it sounds almost like that happened to Cain. When you read about some more in this chapter about his descendants, where they ended up and everything, you'll see, especially I think it was his great grandson Lamech. Oh boy, things must have been gotten very bad by that generation. You'll read about him in towards the end of the chapter there, the next few verses. Well, what was the purpose of Cain's punishment? That he would be a vagabond, a fugitive, the Lord said. I mean, he was just predicting what would happen. He was going to have to leave his family, wasn't he? Do you think it was
something, Teresa?
Yeah.
When I read this chapter, I saw a tough man, if I can say that, a tough man with a great rebellion in his heart. And I think when God punished him and don't allow him to die or to be killed by others, is to, I don't know, it's my thought, my thinking, is to give a time of grace to him, maybe he living more time and see how the world is growing in the people. I don't know, maybe it was a time of grace to him. That this punishment was a time for grace. I think, thinking about that God is a love God, caring God, and a God of grace. I think the punishment is a time of grace to him, to Cain.
I know it may sound kind of harsh at first, that he had to leave his family like he did and everything, but he was merciful in the fact that he assured Cain that he wouldn't have the violent death that his brother had, because someone could have tried to avenge that death and he could have ended up dying, just like Abel did. So at least he had some sense of God's mercy when God told him that. Well, I'll make sure that you're safe from that. I'll put a curse sevenfold on people that try to avenge your death. But I think it was important that he would leave the family too, simply because he was not a good influence on the rest of the family after that. I mean, you can imagine how uncomfortable people would have been with him there. It was better all around that they separated and parted ways like that. Although it did allow for like I say, the generations after Cain, he ended up taking. I'm sure he must have taken his wife, because he had children after that. So, and some of them did not end up so good. We don't know that. We aren't real familiar with the story of Lamech, but if you look at verses 23 and 24, first of all, Lamech was the first one to have two wives. That is recorded in the Bible, that he had two wives. How would having two wives, do you think, have affected Lamech's family? Have you ever thought about, I mean, I've done some reading about books of Joseph Smith, and Brigham Young, and the idea of having multiple wives, and it doesn't seem like a good idea.
I was gonna say,
I think
overall, I think it would be some discord, I just
Mhm.
don't think it would, it might have seemed like a good idea to him at the time, but I don't think it was probably a good thing to get started.
It brings a lot of jealousy and contention, I think, and that's very problematic, because that
Yep.
spirit just stays in the family. You can try to push it down, but that underlying sentiment is there,
Mhm.
and I don't think it fares well for the family.
Yeah. No wonder things started going downhill. And I know we're going to read about the flood next week, so we're too after that. So we're going to find out where some of these things led to. But in verses 23 and 24, it records a song, a poem, or something that this Lamech wrote. He said he said it to his wives, and it really sounds like he's bragging about a murder that he had committed. He said that, well, I'll just read the verses for you here. There's some hard to pronounce words here. It says, then Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, I guess that's how they're pronounced, hear my voice, wives of Lamech, listen to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. Does that sound like bragging to you? I don't know. He's killed a man younger than him. In other words, even though I'm old, I'm still strong, and he killed a man for wounding me. He wasn't protecting anybody else, was he? He was protecting himself. which I guess self-defense is a good reason maybe, but
Doesn't necessarily even say though that it was self-defense. It just says he, we don't know how the man wounded him.
true, true.
But yeah, this is definitely, he was so enamored of his murder that he wrote a poem about it, a little song, a little ditty.
Yeah.
Look at me, I'm Lamech. Listen to me, I killed a guy. It was horrible.
I never really picked up on that until I studied it this lesson that week. Yes, you'll see that too.
And I think the Lord, talks about how he visits the sin of the fathers onto the children, onto the third generation. And that's God's good mercy, because actually if he didn't stop it up there, it would perpetuate forever. So I think the fact that Cain was the father, essentially, of this man who, that spirit of anger was in the lineage from Cain. And I think that I've heard that whatever sin the father commits, the children will commit it exponentially more so. And so I think it's very powerful and very important to know that we really have to be very cautious and careful with what we do, especially as parents of children. We have to be very careful that we don't inflict our sin upon them and their children and their children's children because of our misgivings and our weakness. We really have to cling to the Lord to gain that strength that we need to,
Our lesson is about
do the
Cain
right
and
thing.
Cain and his legacy. You're right. You're talking about his legacy now. And we all have a legacy, don't we? It's either going to be a good one or it's going to be a bad one. So
Exactly. Yes.
Well, there is the chapter 4 started with a hopeful sign with Cain's birth, because that was a promise to and joy to Adam and Eve when Cain was born. But the chapter ends with another happy, hopeful sign. Somebody want to read verse 25? Or we can read 25. Just 25. What happened at the end of the chapter?
So verse
Okay, I'll read it.
25.
You can go for it, Daniel. Go for it.
Okay. Adam lay with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. And then I'll read 26 there. Seth
Okay.
also had a son, and his name was Enosh. Okay, I'll stop there.
Enosh, yeah. Enosh, such a similar name to Enoch. Up a few chapters before, Cain had a son named Enoch, it said, and he built a city and called it after him. Yeah. So Seth, when you think about it, they not only lost Abel, they lost Cain, didn't they? Both sons must have seemed like they were lost to them. And why was the birth of Seth necessary for God's plan of salvation to move forward? What was important about that?
Perhaps another plan of redemption that the Lord is always trying to keep in place for us.
He was not the deliverer himself, but we read in the next chapter his descendants ended up leading up to Jesus. So, yeah.
I think it was an important promise at that moment, for Adam and Eve, because of course they had put all their hopes in Cain, and obviously Cain wasn't it, and Abel was gone. So I think that that birth, obviously it becomes a great promise for all of us, but I think in that moment it was just God's wonderful mercy to Adam and Eve to let them know, no, we're still good, we got this.
Yeah. I'm sure, do you think their opinion changed about Abel after this episode? They could see it, they at least could see Cain, what he had done, and lost their hopes in him. But hopefully it also showed them, and I'm sure God spoke with them about it, that Abel indeed was the righteous one. And we think we understand people, but we don't always get it right either, do we?
We don't.
No, we can't. Well, I think I've just about covered everything that, I don't want to get in it too deeply anymore, because I think you're going to get it yourself when you study this week. But there are a lot of important things to study and learn from this chapter. So if nobody else has any thoughts about Cain and Abel, we'll just go ahead and move on to, should we have closing prayer, or do you want to have let's have the closing song and then we'll have closing prayer, I guess. This is a great song too, by the way. Kim and I have heard it. It probably goes more with our lesson this week. Yeah, but it applies to this week, next week too. I just
Wow.
want, yeah, I wanted to say a couple more things about the lesson this week to look for. And that is the symbol of blood. You know, he said, Abel's blood speaks to me from the ground. So that's what death brings. And just the symbol of blood, why it's so important. And also the fact that when Adam and Eve had to leave the garden, and then now Cain has to leave his family, the idea of being separated from God because of sin. So that's another theme that was in there. But anyway, should we have closing prayer? Somebody want to volunteer to close with prayer?
I can do that.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, you are so good and so wonderful. And we are so thankful that you have made a way, that you have worked through generation after generation after generation, because you cared enough about me and every person that's in this group and every person who's ever lived. That you care about us as individuals, not just as some weird, large group. And that is mind-boggling and wonderful. Thank you for the members of this group that are here today, and for those that didn't join us, Lord, just be with them and bless their week. Be with Mo and his lovely wife and Sandra, and help them to have a great week, and Mo to finish up his seminar and translating on a high note. We love you, Lord, and we just thank you so much for all that you've done for us. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Amen.
That'll be it.
And
Thank
hi,
you.
Elsa. I didn't say hi, Elsa. She's
Hi,
there.
Elsa. Elsa doesn't have a microphone going, so she can't talk back at us.
Thank you, everyone. Elsa, Jose, Dilma, Daniel, Kim, Teresa. Thank you all for being here and making this a very special time in the light of Mo and Sandra's absence. Thank you all so much. It's been wonderful. Have a beautiful, blessed week, and we will catch you here, God willing, same time, same place, next week.
Sounds great. Thank you, Val, for playing Mo.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
You all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.